The Provoke Podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Provoke Media podcast. I am very fortunate to be joined here today by three representatives of PROI, that's Public Relations Organization International, which is, I think it's fair to say, the largest network of independent public relations firms around the world. And we have representatives from three continents on our call today as we set out to discuss some of the issues facing women entrepreneurs in the public relations business, women leaders in the public relations business, and some of the differences perhaps in style and priorities that have begun to emerge as our industry has welcomed more and more female leaders. I think we'll start by going around the table or the screen or whatever, and just have people quickly introduce themselves and maybe tell us a little bit about what prompted them to start their own businesses, and whether there were experiences in other workplaces that made them feel that it was necessary to start their own business in order to achieve their goals in the PR business. And because I have Baba in the top left-hand corner, I'm going to ask her to go first. Baba.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Baba Kofi. I'm a managing partner at Mahogany Consults. Mahogany Consults is in Ghana, West Africa, and I'm very excited to be here with all of you, ladies and gentlemen. So a bit about my how I got into entrepreneurship. You know, I've always called myself an entrepreneur at heart. And that's because I get excited when I discover opportunities, you know, to come up with a strategy to do something, you know, and also the desire to create employment for somebody else. I worked in Saatchi & Saatchi before I started Mahogany Consult with my business partner, Issy. And during that period, we got a lot of training, you know, we had a lot of experience, but at a point, I realized that we could actually do something bigger, you know, in the PR space. And there were a few boardroom issues, so we decided to jump ship and start our own agency. And today we are 10 years in business this year, doing great. We are part of top three agencies in Ghana, and we are very excited, you know, to be here. So that's just a little brief.
As promised, it's probably worth noting that Ghana is one of the 2 or 3 best developed public relations markets in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a market where we get a lot of really good award entries and a lot of good award judges, and we always see a huge representation from Ghana at the African Public Relations Association meetings. So a thriving market. It's great that you're doing so well in it. I'm working my way clockwise. So Claire, tell us a little bit about your background.
Hello, so I'm Claire Parsons. I co-founded Lancers in London in 1989. So I've got quite a lot of a generational shift in how I started Lansons. And it's over 3 decades we've been in business. So I set up at Lansons when I joined the City of London, the business environment. I was in Cheapside, and Cheapside was largely organisations that were global in their attitude, but still deeply rooted for me in the past. When I say that, it is that they were largely run by men with organisational structures where throughout the business and seniority, they were largely run by men, and women might have had some place as in those days, personnel heads. Now, I enjoyed it. I was at Hugh Rogerton. They were doing a lot of the privatizations there. They were integrated communication organizations. But I also found that I was working with a lot of entrepreneurs, and these happened to be entrepreneur men, and they talked to me about launching my own business. And that became quite interesting. My agency at the time was bought back by Hugh Rogerton, and that was the catalyst for me to say, do you know, I'm going to be brave enough to do this. So it was a combination really of the right time. I had a lot of backing from other entrepreneurs who were my clients. And I knew that if I wanted to have an unfettered chance of in my life of doing great things, I believed I had a better chance of doing that as an independent. And I joined Tony, my now partner, to build Lansons. And I believe we have a legacy, and we have built a business that has a legacy based on having no glass ceiling and having everybody having the opportunity to make something of themselves. But hopefully we'll go into a little bit more of that later. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Amy, you have yet another slightly different story. You come from an entrepreneurial family, but how did that influence your decision?
Yeah, it's funny. I think I've come from a very different background. I worked in a small agency in Boston, then went to join my father's firm, Reuter Finn, along with 2 siblings. And in the mid-90s, I decided I wanted to go back to school, and I went to Columbia Business School and got an MBA. And that's what really led me to want to leave and start my own business. It was an amazing opportunity. Not only did I come from an entrepreneurial family, because my father was obviously an entrepreneur, but having gone through business school, it really gave me insights into what starting a company entailed. And so I started my own company in 2001. It was originally part of Reuter Finn. It was an independent subsidiary. I got to move into my own space and set up all my, own administrative tasks. And then I ultimately split off from them. But my path was really driven by having gone to business school, and that sort of gave me the confidence that I could set up my own business and do it my own way, which was very different than my family had been doing it.
Cool. So 3 different stories there. And one of the things that I like about the makeup of the panel actually is not only do we have 3 different continents represented, but I think we have 3 different generations represented. I'm not going to speculate about the age of anybody on this call. This is more about the age of your firms, that they were set up at slightly different times. And I wonder, therefore, whether the challenges that you faced in setting up your firms were different depending on the era. And Claire, I'll go to you first, because Lansons was clearly the earliest of the 3 firms on the panel to be represented. Tell me what it was like to be a female entrepreneur in the public relations business back in the 80s.
Well, it was a combination of things. One is, it was incredibly rare that women were around in any seniority whatsoever. And in those businesses, it was very unusual. And we had so many established names that even exist today saying we'd never make it. There was something really interesting about just doing it in your own way. Amy, that's exactly how we regarded it. We wanted to make our mark. We wanted to be different. And I think part of it, therefore, was the freedom we had of not following any path ahead of us. We were making our own judgment about the type of business we wanted. And I think I've often talked about how in business at the time, I think there were very male structures in those. And therefore, your behaviors, if you're in my generation, were very much driven by, there's a story about my boss, Tony Carlisle. At the time, I was in a large meeting with 20 people with all the financial advisors for, I think it was TSB that's converting from a mutual into a quoted company. I've been there a week, and Tony Carlisle pointed to me and said, if you're not going to contribute in this meeting, you can get out. And from that point, the whole point of being in a meeting was to speak up, was to bring your ideas to it and to be challenged and challenging in a conversation. And what I've learned, I think the biggest lesson is that there are some times when you do shut up, there are times to listen, and there's time to actually get as many people around the table to offer their views than not only having to have your own. So generationally, there are many different things in our time. It was unusual. Back then, of course, we didn't have mobile phones. We were just having computers. We sent our press release via bikes to the journalists' offices. Then we still worked a lot in politics as well and with government. And we were doing broad stakeholder things, but it was a very, very different environment. And we were taught you had to be out there at parties, networking in your own self. And so your personality meant you had to be doing things, which I think is very, very different than you have to be today.
Amy, what about your perspective in the US and the timing of your launch? I mean, I think probably at that time, there was a generation of firms coming along that were founded by and led by women that were doing quite well in areas like healthcare and technology and public affairs and especially in the consumer and fashion spaces. You chose to carve out something that was a little different than any of that, really. But did you face any of the same skepticism that Claire talked about?
So my challenge was I started my company on March 1st, 2001. And I carved the business that I ran out of Reuter Finn, of which a lot was .com. So first we had 9/11. And then we had the .com bust. So I don't really think I had challenges. I mean, again, going to business school really prepared me well because I knew that I had to have a strong relationship with my bankers. I started going out with them 2 or 3 times a year socially. I put in place the structure that made sure that from an operational point of view, we didn't have any issues, but we faced an incredible disaster when we got to the end of the year between 9/11 and the .com bust. And I remember Bill Heyman, who was a good friend, said to me, Amy, if you can make it through this, you'll make it through anything. And he was absolutely right. I never felt any challenges really as a woman in starting a business. I had senior men on my team, and I used to say to people, listen, you go into a meeting with a diversity of people, they might like you, they might like me. I don't really care who they like as long as they like one of us. And so, we really didn't face challenges. We grew our business. 2002 was a big struggle. But after 2002, we got back on our feet. We went from doing .com business really back to our heritage. Mine was doing a lot of financial services. 50% of our business is financial services and corporate. The other 50% is consumer. And we always thought that was interesting because you could always do more innovative things on the consumer side of the business first and then bring them onto the corporate side. And so we liked that combination. But I personally never felt challenges as a woman running the business. There are lots of men that love to work with women, and there are lots of men who prefer to work with men, and I gave them a choice. And that's kind of how we've run our business ever since.
Right. Barbara, your experience again is presumably a little different. You're the most recent of our entrepreneurs here, starting a firm in an environment where women's empowerment had already become part of the sort of global discussion. Tell me about your experiences in that regard.
Yes. So for us, again, we started Mahogany with a lot of excitement and a passion, for PR. The biggest struggle for us was that we had zero understanding of business. Unlike, Amy, who had gone to business school and understood what she was doing. But it was just with our hearts and our emotions, just get out there and make a difference and change the world, and that's what we wanted to do. And that made us struggle at the beginning, because in terms of even who to hire, we would sit on an interview panel, and the person who we feel, the most pity for, will recruit. And so for us, I think it was that feminine side of us got the better of us than the business, side of us. In terms of actually registering the company and starting it, no, we had very little challenges. The only other challenge perhaps I would want to talk about were some clients who were still not comfortable, or who felt, who are these young girls, sitting in front of me and trying to give me counsel on this business I have run for 20 years. What do they know? So we had the issue of, a few anti, women entrepreneurs, but even more, the age difference, because we were quite young. We still are young anyway, and that for us was a huge factor. But over time, and as the narrative, of women empowerment and equity, etc., has really resounded in Ghana, and it's incredible how we have gained, rather, as a result of the fact that we are women. And now in Ghana, we have so many women leaders, and women have become an inspiration, leaders that you can look up to. And although when we started Mahogany, there was only one woman, just like Claire, one woman who had a PR agency. She was the only one. All the other agencies were multinationals, or had partnerships and all of that. And now you can count so many other, agencies which are run by women. Yes.
Claire, I want to come back to something that you said that I thought was interesting and illustrative of some of the issues. Certainly, some time ago, but I suspect many of them linger today. You were talking about being urged to speak up in meetings, and it's always seemed to me that women in our business, and particularly women in leadership or consulting positions in our business, have to be more conscious of the tightrope that they walk in sort of how assertive they are, how willing to speak up they are in meetings, balancing that maybe with the awareness that if they speak up too much, there are men who are going to think that they're pushy. There is a word that begins with B that I have heard over and over again applied to female leaders in our business that I very rarely heard applied to men who behave in an almost identical fashion. There have always seemed to me to be different standards for women in leadership, and either you're too assertive or you're too quiet, but you're constantly being judged on that. Did you feel a lot of that when you were starting out, and were you able to ignore it or find a solution?
I think you have to ignore it, because if you're going to be successful, you never know at the time, do you? You set something up and you have no idea of the scope and size of what it's going to do. And B, so you have to be true to yourself, and you have to play to your own strength. And I think that you have to be mindful of what's around you. But I think it's more important today that we recognize that there's a value in diversity around a table. There's a value in that in the organization, and we're advising our clients on the value of that. And that is very different in each place. And I think as we increase our consultancy, it becomes something we are conscious of ourselves, but we have to believe in ourselves. So it's much more, I think, now about seeing the external factors. Something I got from PROI, actually, which made a big difference to me. I was I have to say this, the first and so far only woman who has been global chair of PROI in 50 years. But the point about that was it was an amazing opportunity to speak to the board from all around the world, because culturally people are different too. So we have personality differences, we have cultural differences, we've got different, we bring something else to the table. So for me now, I am more interested in trying to give women and men the tools and navigating sensibly and sensitively to get the best out of the people around you. And that's what leadership looks like now. Although I'm involved in the 30% Club and some women on boards work. And there's a lot that businesses are now having to do to coach women, senior women, to be panelists, to go on to news programs, to face the type of scrutiny often, Paul, that you allude to as well, because women do face a higher level of scrutiny. They are looked at in a way and standards are different. But equally, most of us who are up there just get on with it. So at the beginning, you're aware of it, but you can't carry it for long.
Barbara, you mentioned the challenge that you sometimes had being taken seriously by, I'm assuming, mostly male clients. Did you find a sort of simple solution to proving your value to skeptical men? Is there an answer to that, or is it a case-by-case thing where you just have to prove that you're giving good advice and that you know what you're talking about?
Yes, so that is where the quality of our work and the ability to provide the right counsel, based on scientific research. And when data tells the story, it's very, difficult to see it otherwise. And so I think Issy and I deliberately had to go all out to get the best tools, to put together the best strategies and present. And sometimes we needed to push, for appointment times and the opportunity to present communication strategies for free, just so that we'll get the message, out there that this is, you need to take us seriously. We are professionals. We know what we are doing. We are here to present you the best strategy to move your business forward. And that was, the only way out. I remember one CEO of a huge hospital here in Ghana saying that, wow, so this is what you guys do? Wow, I doff my hats to you, because from the beginning, it felt like, yeah, So it was that process of coming up with that quality, of work. And over time, we've had to sustain it because, again, as Claire said, when you are a woman, it's as though you need to still prove yourself and you need to keep on proving yourself. But it starts with believing in what you have so that you can present that to them. And over time, you are accepted.
Amy, one of the things that I've read a lot about over the last couple of years, when it comes to women in business in particular and women in leadership positions in particular, is that there's a higher incidence of imposter syndrome among women. That sort of belief that they're maybe not as great as everybody thinks they are. I've always felt that imposter syndrome was both natural and healthy. I have a slight distrust of anybody who doesn't have at least some of that. But did you find, did you ever suffer from those kind of insecurities? And how much did the sort of going back to school cure you of that?
So, one of the things that drove me back to school was in the early 90s, I started working for Citibank. And, there was a sense of, I was just a PR person, and all the marketing people were MBAs. And so I really didn't get it. And so that's kind of what drove me to this decision. I'd always wanted to go to business school. My father was really into the arts. He thought it was a waste of time. And I finally said, I'm doing it. And I ended up taking a lot of courses, like, in the finance area. So it really strengthened my belief in myself and my ability to work with financial services institutions. So I didn't really have that sense of an imposter, but I see it with a lot of young women who come in and work with me, where they really need their confidence built up. And I remember in the 90s, I used to talk to Dave Drobis, who was running Ketchum and PRSA, and he would talk about APR. And I said, listen, I don't want to see APR after anyone's name. I want to see MBA or JD, have people really feel confidence in the knowledge that they bring, data science. And so I think it's an issue that a lot of women have. And I think going to school and getting a graduate degree does help build your confidence. And I think it's really important. I mean, something that both Claire and Baba said is, if you walk into a room and a man is skeptical about your abilities, if you come out with really good advice and you're really smart and you can make a difference for their business, that's the only thing that they'll react to. And so I think that is one of the things that's so critical in running any business and any entrepreneur, right? Is you have to have impact and you have to show that what you're bringing to them is real value. And, that's, I think, one of the things that has been important to the success of RF Binder. And, I think we've been really lucky in terms of having great clients who've allowed us to bring value to them, because part of it is it's also a partnership. But that's how, as a woman, I think you can convince people that you'll make a difference for them is if you're bringing value and having impact.
Right. So one of the things that has been apparent to me as we've covered the business over the years is that until relatively recently, it was very difficult for women in the big publicly held companies to elevate themselves to the C-suite and to the CEO's office in particular. And I think until about 7 or 8 years ago, if you wanted to be the CEO of a public relations firm, you almost had to start your own. Now, we've seen something of a change in that regard over the last few years. And so, we had Donna Imperato at BCW, we had Anna Maria De Selva at H&K, we had Barry Rafferty at Ketchum for a while, we had Gail Hyman at Weber Shandwick, and suddenly we were in an environment where half of the top 10 agencies were being led by women. And I think, as our industry has an occasional tendency to do, we started patting ourselves on the back about how we'd solved the age-old problem, and we still see this, right? I mean, we do best agencies to work for research, which gives us a lot of demographic information on the PR industry, and the reality is that at the 20 to 30 age range, we're looking at an industry that is somewhere between 65 and 70% female. And then in the 50 plus or even 40 plus age range, we're looking at an industry that is somehow majority male, which suggests to me that if we have solved the problem, it's been more a few exceptional circumstances than it has been a collective triumph over all of the factors that lead women to leave our industry. All of this, I'm sorry, I don't mean to turn this into a monologue. That there's been progress, but there are still issues that need to be addressed. What's your feeling I'm happy to go round the screen or to have everybody jump in with their own thoughts, but what's your feeling about sort of the progress we've made and the challenges that we still face?
So,
Claire?
so I think there's a variety of things in there, and I think it's really important to raise those things, that there are now more women in business, and the pipeline that you talked about is exactly what the issue is. So why aren't more women staying through as they progress in their careers and their lives change? And not all women are carers, but a lot of them are, and that extra burden is difficult. And all the research shows that during COVID, some of those traditional bases of how women and men used to work, women take more care of the children, the man doesn't, have actually come back. So there's a huge amount of research to show that has been a problem, which means it could well be something in the future we'll start seeing as well. I go back to the gender pay gap. We've always had more women in power. We've always had more women who own part of the business. We have never had a significant gender pay gap. We're small enough now. We know 3 people have gone on maternity leave, and that's why. So we absolutely manage and understand the significance of keeping women in our workforce and men, and trying to actually build something that has both thriving through it. But also, the world is changing. We can work from home a little bit more now. We don't have to be present all the time. I think this notion of what leadership looks like is different. And where our clients on the other side also, where mine at the beginning were all men, they are no longer all men. And so again, the brilliant thing is they're important actually from a London business scene. They're not all white men. They're not all white men and white women. They are different people. And that's, I think, a real exciting change for us all, that I think is going to show a future that will be a really interesting one and have its own set of challenges too. So I think money is important. Paul, you might remember at the beginning, because I suspect we may well have travelled a bit of that same period. When I first had a job, I was told that a man who had a family should have the next promotion over a single woman. And that was just like, God, we should really glory in our changes. That no longer would exist. Our HR practices are stronger. We recognise that's wrong. So I think there's massive opportunity now for everyone, which is important. And our job collectively is to make sure all the talent remains, whoever they are.
If I can build on that for a second, Paul, I think
sure.
One of the challenges is exactly what you said, is keeping women in the workforce, because they start out and then they leave. And I think one of the opportunities that we have as a female-run company is to create an environment in which we can keep women. And I do agree with Claire that because of COVID and the ability to work from home, it really allows us to do that more. And I think that as a female-run company, as each one of us, if we've had children, we know what it's like. I mean, I never stopped working. I've worked all the way through all 3 of my children. The longest I took off was a month, and the shortest was an hour and a half, because back in those days you had to. But they don't have to do that anymore. And I think we have a responsibility to create an environment, not only for women, but for men also. I mean, we give, second caregivers time off after a child. And I think the only way we're going to change the dynamic of senior women, having more senior women, is keeping women in the profession, in the workforce, and encouraging them to do better. I mean, we've sponsored a number of women to go on and get MBAs, and we've helped pay for it. So I think that's our responsibility, and that's the way we're going to change the dynamic. And while we have women running large firms today, there's no guarantee it's going to be that way tomorrow. And so we've got to change that dynamic, and each one of us has an opportunity to do that.
And we're probably training next generations. If you think about everything all of us have, I don't mean to we're allowed to on this topic. We are the role models that I didn't see. I did not see them when I was young. And we are those people. And that really genuinely is inspiring. I'm sure all of us have had people who work with us saying how much it meant to them as well. And that's okay. We're allowed not to have to be modest all the time, which again is a problem sometimes with women. We're not allowed to say, haven't we been great?
Yeah, I mean, I remember growing up, my mother said to me, you can't work, have a child, and be married at the same time. And my response to her was, who wrote that rule? I mean, that's not a rule I'm going to subscribe to.
Yeah.
And there were very few role models, very
I'm
few.
pretty sure it was somebody who looks a lot like me and not like you, but anyway. Baba,
Yes, I mean, well, your mom, I should tell her that actually I was in bed for 6 months to have my baby. I was in hospital for 6 months to have a baby, and every single day of those 6 months, I was working because I had my laptop right in front of me, you know, and running a business from hospital, you know. So yes, the dynamics have really changed, and I agree with you both that we need to empower, you know, more women so that they can step up to leadership. One of the challenges that we have found at Mahogany is when we have young, you know, women join us, the issue of confidence, you know, is really huge and critical. It's taken a lot of training, encouragement, inspiration, and there are those many times you have to have those pep talks. You know, you have to encourage them. You need to find a way so that they believe in themselves some more to take up leadership roles. And when they do get there, it is still not smooth sailing. You know, you need some sustenance support. But we realize that it's the only way really to get them to that level, because they do deserve it, because they are hardworking, because they are intelligent, and they get the job done. And so for us here at Mahogany, it's a conscious mentoring session, a number of sessions that we have for these young women, because we don't want them to be at the top, and we don't want to lose them as well. Yes.
Oh, Paul, you're on mute.
Baba, I want to stay with you for a second and ask you, there are certain leadership characteristics, greater empathy, greater collaboration, that I think many of us tend to associate with female leaders in particular. Every time there's an example of toxic male leadership in the news, there are alternative views that say, you know, if we had more women in leadership, this kind of stuff wouldn't happen. I'm always a little concerned that that in itself is a very gendered assumption. But at the same time, I can't help thinking that some of the things that have happened in our industry over the last few years, particularly focus on mental health issues, for example, and the amount of stress that many sort of rank and file public relations people feel every day. We've had more focus on those things because we have women leaders who are more, who can identify more or empathize more with that kind of stress and strain. Do you think that there is a female leadership style that is different from the sort of male-dominated world of 20 years ago?
So I don't think it's perhaps a conscious female leadership style, but it is kind of woven into our DNA somehow. But yes, I believe that women tend to be more empathetic. However, I also see that narrative changing because I think the men are learning from us. But it's because of our nurturing nature. It is so easy, you know, it comes second skin to us. So for instance, I remember one of our managers who was pregnant, she had a stitch. It was just a stitch, you know, and she just screamed, you know, out. And Issy and I were like frantic, get home, take some days off. You know, she said, oh, I'm fine. No, you're not fine. Because we are women, we just understand it, you know. And then, so for instance, every Monday morning when we have a morning meeting, Issa would ask everyone, how was your weekend? You know, what did you do? How's the family? Etc., etc. So these were not consciously built into the structures of Mahogany, but it just came out of our own natural nurturing system. But we find it very useful and very important to our staff. And so it has become over time a leadership style. And it is quite different from men because we work under a man as well. You know, in Sachi, and Sachi prior to setting up Mahogany. And yes, he was a very nice person, good leader, but we did not experience, you know, at the time, you know, that kind of engagement, that kind of emotional bond. We did not experience it. And so, yes, I think it has become over time, but the men are learning and very quick. And COVID has even made it more, it's made it easier because now we realize that it is no longer just about the work. People are looking for more than a salary. People are looking for a place to belong. And so it is becoming more than just, you know, women picking that up. Yes.
Amy, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think you have to be careful in this area because on the one hand, I think women are more nurturing. I think they're consensus builders. I think they do have empathy. The problem is that any entrepreneur has to be tough, right? So when you get to the point of what you made earlier about the B word, you know, then there's a combination. Nobody's that simple. Nobody's that flat. I think that women bring into the workplace, particularly if they're an entrepreneur, an empathy and caring and nurturing, but they're also tough and they got to run a business. And sometimes they got to make really tough decisions. And that's not in opposition to the nurturing piece. But they go together. And so I think that it's not simply, I do think women have a very different style, but that style is bringing both the toughness and the nurturingness together and creating an environment in which you can have both.
Right. And Claire, I started out this section by talking about the focus that our industry has put on mental health over the last 2 or 3 years, probably belatedly. But it does seem that a lot of that has been driven by the higher EQ that we see from so let's say a new generation of leaders, which includes more women than the older generation of leaders. And by an understanding of what it is that women employees in particular have to bring to the table, because the work-life balance expectations are often very different. What have you seen in terms of the evolution of our thinking around those issues?
I think all of this is, I agree with what everybody's been saying about it. I'd start with saying it is about logic and empathy. I think we have to know that as business leaders, we have to have both. But I think your point around understanding our people more. And if we understand our people, we understand the life pressures that they go through. And we decide as business leaders how much we want to bring that into our business. So I think it's also I wouldn't say it's a fashion, because that suggests it's not a really important issue. But I think we're currently going through that point where people are realizing more. We are, as businesses, having to structure things around people. I think COVID has made people, as we know, young people have had a really tough time in this, and they bring that to the office. And if we want to be offices that you are allowed to be authentic in, then we are tackling all these things. And there's no doubt that this whole area of things like our mental health and how we're responding to stress and the right balance is something that we have as business leaders got to be very, very aware of. It's almost on every panel discussion, isn't it? It's almost on every debate around how people are coping. I wonder whether the words will change, though, because I was talking to the head of Clifford Chance diversity piece, and they're talking about not work-life balance, but the balance of work and home, and they're trying to shift it a little bit at the moment, because it's probably going on too long. But this notion of how we are managing our work-life balance, I think, is going to be higher up the scale. For us, though, in this, it's just one part of running an office, and so we're more interested but I think you're right. We're running a business that has a place in the community. It has a place that has a responsibility. We're very lucky to have jobs. We expect to contribute in a wider way. Lancers always has, whether it is donating a percentage of our profits to charity. We care about people. That comes up very high with Great Place to Work. So all of those aspects mean that our people who want to look in think we're too empathetic, and that if you are in the business that runs like this and you believe that they're useful, I think it is around leaving a footprint in the sand, and it is around good behaviors. And I think this all comes from good behaviors.
Great. I'm gonna try and squeeze in one last question. We don't have a lot of time left, so brief answers are better, which is a little unfortunate because it's a big question, as you might expect. But I'm wondering how we all feel about the next generation of women in the public relations business. I've been writing about this long enough to remember the sort of something between skepticism, scorn, and hostility that welcomes each new generation as they come into the public relations workplace with their unreasonable expectations and their me first attitudes. And I mean, I've heard every trope that you could imagine about why the next generation is not as good as whatever your generation happened to be. But it does seem to me that the younger generation of women have different ideas, and indeed the younger generation generally have different ideas about what they expect from work, what is reasonable for them to be asked to do, how much purpose they want to derive from the work that they do. How do we all feel about the next generation of leaders, female leaders in particular in our business, and how we nurture them and make them successful? Amy?
Look, I think the next generation is different. And as you say, every generation is different. I remember growing up that the generation before me was critical of us. I think that what we need to do is listen and hear and learn and find a way to help them and mentor them, but they're going to help us and mentor us too. They're going to change us because everything that we think isn't necessarily right. And I think that I've got some terrific, absolutely terrific young women working for me who are 25, 26, 27-year-olds. And I hope they stay with me for their career because they're absolutely fabulous. And yeah, they're looking for purpose in their jobs without question. But that makes sure that we can help provide that through the company. So I think that a lot of the belief systems that we have that maybe get pushed off to the side because we say, oh, well, we have to generate money and income and we have things that we have to address, they're not going to let us do that. And I think it's really healthy. I think conversations between generations is really important. I think it will make us as a society a better society. And I'm very excited about what the young people in my company are really enabling us to do because they're challenging us every day. So I think it's a great thing.
Barbara, what are you seeing? What are the opportunities for young women in your part of the world and in the PR industry and the creative industry?
Sorry. So I think we are seeing two types of young people. But both of them are very different. Both sides are very different from who we know ourselves to be. But so I see these very feisty, creative, out of this world kind of young people who want to change the world, but not necessarily in the way we expect them to. And then there is that other group of young people who are not sure of themselves, who are not even certain if they really want to, walk that path, and so they come in and they are not sure, they go out, another comes in, goes out, that kind of thing. But for these young people who want to change the world, but have different mindsets, I think it is for us to embrace and to be open and have those conversations with them about, yes, this is the way we want to do things. This is the way you think we should do things. How do we collaborate and how do we partner? Because I tell you, I am not that old, as I said earlier. However, I also have some 24, 25, 26-year-olds at Mahogany. And the way their brains work, I have no idea. I don't know how they go to bed and come up with all these very interesting, crazy ideas that clients love, and I'm like, okay, I mean, that's interesting. So I also want to keep them, but sometimes you can't tame them enough, and so we need to be working together and get to that point where, okay, we understand each other, but I love them. I see the potential. We want to mentor them, and we need to teach ourselves that we don't need to mentor them to be like us,
right,
but we need to mentor them into leadership where they can also take the organization to the next level.
Claire, the good news is you get the last word. The bad news is that we only have another minute or two to go. So
okay, it's a time of opportunity. There's immense talent out there. They should just be going for it. And they shouldn't settle for things. Why should they? None of us settled for things. We've launched our own businesses because we weren't prepared to do it. It's the time for female founders, which is really important, do their own thing. Doesn't matter what size it is. They can shape their destinies and the type of work they want to be in any way they choose. And if they want a big company, there's loads of chance. And we do need to be challenged. I agree, Amy. We do know that they think differently, and that's exciting, Baba. So I think it's a really exciting time for the talent that's coming through, and they are exciting. But I also believe our job is to actually help them find a way through that. Perhaps it wasn't, it was a little bit more difficult for us. So I think we have an obligation to the future.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Baba, Amy, and Claire. Thank you to PROI for sponsoring this Provoke Media podcast. Thank you to our audience. We'll be back soon with more stimulating content. I hope this has provided plenty of food for thought. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Provoke podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.